the sun, surface of the sun. It's actually measurably discernible. Now, is it measurable? I mean, it's pretty small, but it's discernible. Now, when we start talking about the gravitational forces of a black hole or an event horizon, which he might use that language, I know Hawking does and Humphreys does in his book, that's the expansion of the universe on the edge of it, that is how time passes on the event horizon versus the center is completely different. So keep that in mind while you're listening to him, because that's where he's going.
Dad, can I
Ow,
send
ow,
an
ow, ow.
email so I can watch it on YouTube to my Bluetooth?
What? Can you what?
I'm gonna watch this in my Bluetooth.
Okay, do what you want.
I don't put a name of it.
No, she's going to email.
It has to do with the.
My cup's leaking, dear. This is a bad cup.
I didn't make it.
I know. I need a new cup.
Ramban brings, Nachmanides brings down. But just as a slight aside before this, you should realize that there's some basic problems in the English translation, okay? The basic problem in English translation is almost everyone reads the ending of each day as things go by. There's evening and morning, one day, and more things happen. Evening, morning, a second day. Just as I'm giving it English now, the mistake in the English. More things happen, evening, morning, a third day. And then on fourth days, they say the shoe hits the floor. And what's the big event of the fourth day? Two great lights. One for the day and one for the evening. Oh, they must be what? The sun and the moon. Got a problem with evening and morning? Day one, evening, morning, a second day? That's the problem with relying on English translation. It is true the text is Erev, and in modern Hebrew, and usually even in the Bible, Erev does mean evening, and Boker means morning, but the Ramban points out that it can't be what we call the silver dish reading. It must be the golden apple. It's a statement from Proverbs 25, verse 11. A word well spoken is like apples of gold in a dish of silver. The silver dish reading is Erev, means evening, but you can't use the silver dish reading because there's no sun mentioned yet. So there must be a deeper meaning. It's totally Ramban. When it's shorter, I'll let you know. Okay? So what does the Ramban say? You have to look for the root. What's the root of the word of Erev? The root of Erev is essentially the same root as the word Eruv. Why does an Eruv work? Obviously, it's the Rabbanan. If it was the rice, you couldn't have an Eruv. But why does an Eruv work? Because it mixes all the domains. See, the root meaning of Erev isn't evening. That's a derived meaning. The root meaning of Erev is mixture, chaos. And as the Rambam points out, the reason that we read it to evening is because when the sun sets, vision becomes blurry, chaotic. He says it's the exact opposite for the morning. There's no sun, so it can't mean morning. Boker Tov does mean good morning in modern Hebrew. In biblical Hebrew, for Genesis chapter 1, Boker cannot mean morning. Guess what? No sun till the fourth day. So how can you have Erev and Boker, Yom Echad, Erev and Yom? Boker, the root meaning of Boker is the exact opposite, like Levaker, to recognize, right? Can you distinguish between blue and black? And that means order. The text is a phenomenal statement, much more interesting in the age of the universe. But the text is saying that Erev gave way to Boker, that chaos gave way to order. That's what the text is saying. Not that there was evening. It's totally the Ramban. That stage by stage, to higher and higher levels of order, till you get to people. It's a phenomenal insight that the Ramban brought down. The text is telling you something phenomenal happened because it is I don't know if the Ramban knew this. Maybe he did. He probably used a mikubah. It is an unequivocal statement. There is no caveat to what I'm about to say. No limit to it. Well, maybe if this, that, and the other thing. Order never arises spontaneously from a disorderly system and remains orderly unless something in nature recognizes that order and it's built in. Order never arises spontaneously. Order can arise spontaneously from a disorderly system, but it always decays back to disorder because nature likes homogeneity. Nature, that's why mountains wash to the sea and bodies decay in the grave. unless something in nature is already built in as if it were expecting that order, or embraces that order and locks it in, order doesn't arrive. But that's what the text is telling me, that something phenomenal happened in this, that stage by stage, or day by day, however you want to see it, goes higher and higher levels of order till you get to the phenomenon of life and consciousness. And the Torah is amazed by that. And it subtly brings it down by slapping the sun down on day number 4. Okay, so anyway, so we have these now. Just jumping back to the age of the universe. So we have a age of the universe that gives us 5.5 days until we get to Adam. Now, the description, a reason that the Torah makes the break at Adam also for the age of the universe and has the 6 days separate is that the description of time for the 6 days of Genesis is unique. Nowhere else in the Torah, on the Tanakh, you find time going, there was evening and morning. Day 1, evening and morning. A second day, evening, morning. That evening and morning bit doesn't appear anywhere else. Okay, so we have that evening leading up to Adam. Then from Adam forward, we know the perspective of time, because as Adam and Eve live X, Y, Z years, have a kid named came Enosh. Seth lives QVW years, there's a kid named Enosh. Enosh lives such and such. Adam and Eve are having kids on Earth. They're not out in outer space. So the perspective of time for Genesis chapter 1, from Adam forward, is Earth time. The question is, what is it from the biblical time for the time before Adam? Because the description of time changes. And it's that reason that at the creation of the soul of Adam, the perception of time changes. And the Ramban gives the answer to this. The Ramban says the nuance in the numbering is the answer. I realize, I apologize, keep using his name. He should have been here to give the... But I don't think he has a website. Unlike Isaac Newton, who still has a website, I don't think the Ramban has a website. And maybe, I haven't checked it actually. So what's the difference? The Rambam gives it very clearly. At the end of each day, the day is numbered. The difficulty with the numbering of the days is the form of the number changes from the ordinal from the absolute to the comparative, to the ordinal to the cardinal. I think that's what it's been. Day 1, evening 1, day 1, but the next doesn't say day 2. It says second day, third day, fourth day, comparative. So why does the text say day 1? Now I assure you that Ramban knew Rashi very well. 1 day, God, one day, but the Ramban's into Tachlis, not the philosophy. The Tachlis, how the world is put together. It's the golden apple. The text says day 1, he points out, because there wasn't yet a second day. Now the Ramban had actually read the Bible a few times. So he knew that the Bible wasn't given, the Torah wasn't given to Adam. It was given to Moses on Sinai. And the nice thing about knowing their ages, you can just add up the years. Add, and you come to Moses on Sinai is 2,448 years after Adam. Well, what's he telling me? It wasn't the second day. By the time you get to Moses, there have been 2,448 years times 365 days a year comes out to just under 900,000 days. By the time you get to Moses on Sinai, there'd been 900,000 second days. And this is his insight. If the view of time for the 6 days of Genesis were from Sinai looking back, the Torah would have written as evening and morning a first day. But it writes day one because there had not yet been a second day. And that's what we all see from the world wars. That in the world wars, no one called, except the pessimists, but no one called the First World War the First World War. It was the Great War, the big war. But by the Second World War, the First World War became the First World War. I always give my same example because it's very personal. I fought in the First Lebanese War. None of us fighting in Lebanon, the First Lebanese War, including my 4 buddies that didn't come back from that First Lebanese War, called it the First Lebanese War. We were fighting in Lebanon. Now, why would I have to say I fought in the First Lebanese War? Why don't I just say I fought in Lebanon? Because, very sadly, there's been a Second Lebanese War. Exactly. It's exactly the same. It's just... The Torah writes day one because there hadn't been a second day. Really? By the time you get to Sinai, there had been hundreds of thousands of second days. The only perspective of time that essentially forces the Torah, or the hint the Torah is giving, put it that way, is that when there hadn't been a second day, it's on the first day. The Torah sees time from the beginning looking forward. And once you know anything about cosmology or astronomy, that's the answer. I can tell you, if I have a student in class, because the students change at age, it's not like a whole year at a time, and has taken AP in astronomy, they can finish the class right there. I can sit down. And everyone realizes, it's not a secret, any measurement that we make of a distant, if you're not right there at the beginning, right there at the event, but you have to see the event with a telescope over time, well, that information has to travel to, you don't see it lifetime. If the galaxy is 5 billion light years away, it took 5 billion years for light to reach you. That's the definition of a light year. How long it takes to travel 1 light year is 1 year. But what happens in the galaxy, what happens in the universe, this is the NASA diagram, just hold it to the camera. It's NASA, everything on here is from NASA, the National Space Authority, except, because they say that, no, everything here is, except my notes that are scribbled all over the bottom. We have a creation of the universe, and it expands out. Again, this part of the diagram, we have that really, we didn't know it was going to be so popular, but it is popular. Proof of God in 5 minutes deals exactly with this part of the diagram, the creation. I urge you to look it up. For those that haven't heard me make this blurb before, there are over 4 million views saying it's just this, the creation. That's proof of God in 5 minutes. But here we have an expanding universe. So the universe is getting larger and larger. This is a diagram of time. Creation, each line's another billion years. Over time, the universe starts at a small point, expands out. The oval out here is where we are. And we live on that oval. The oval is to show the universe is expanding in all directions. Okay, this is a timeline. Yeah?
If as I understand you to say, after Adam, time as we understand it.
In the Bible's point of view. From the Bible's perspective of time is earth time.
If that's the case, then how do we understand the chronology of...
Oh, no, I can't get it. That's different. We'll get to that later.
Living 900
Yeah,
years.
that's not a problem, but that's not a major problem. Any geneticist will tell you can make it happen. But if you have time at the end, we'll get into it, okay? So I'm going to go forward and put this all together. I'll get you in a moment. Okay, so we have this expansion over time. Now, we have no idea what makes the universe expand, but it is expanding. Not like a lettuce or a cabbage or an onion with layers being added on. The universe gets bigger by space stretching, which, of course, no one has any idea what that means, but that's the only way of understanding the universe. And that's the key, because if you are watching, we live here and we look back in time, and we saw 14 billion years go by. What would those 14 billion years look like from the beginning? We measure this age by looking at galaxies far in the depth, and we see the light coming to us through space. We don't go out to space. We get it when it comes here. But space is stretching. And so as a light wave, because light is both a particle and a wave, which is something that is impossible to fit into a human brain, but we know that has to be the case, or your iPhone wouldn't work. Okay, so light travels through space as a wave, but the space through which it's swimming or traveling is stretching. So the wavelength actually stretches out. And the further away it is from us, the more it's stretched. And by measuring the amount of stretching, thanks to the work of Henrietta Leavitt, who almost got the Nobel Prize but died of cancer before she could get it, and Hubble bases his measurements totally on her insight, okay, the Hubble telescope at Siddler, he had nominated her for a Nobel Prize because he knew how important her work was, but she died, so she didn't get the Nobel Prize. In any event, the work by Henrietta Leavitt and Edwin Hubble allows us to measure the rate of expansion of the universe. Now there's hundreds of other people that use that approach. And if we can measure the rate of expansion of the universe, so we can measure over time the rate it's expanding, and if we know from this year to next year how it's getting bigger, so what you can do is run the equation backward in time. So if it's from this year to next year, what about this year to last year? To millions of years ago, to billions of years ago. And when you run the equation back in time, it takes 14 billion years to get back to here. So that's the key of how we make that measurement. And that measurement is based on hundreds of measurements at least. Okay, so we have a creation to the universe. Yes?
What is it expanding into?
That's a great question. I had a student in Dallas, Texas, must be maybe 5 years ago. And I was teaching this to like second and third graders, and her question was, if the universe is expanding into maybe God, does that mean God's getting smaller? So we have no idea what it's expanding into. It's expanding into nothing. The difficulty, nothing doesn't fit in your brain. I discussed this in the Proof of God in 5 minutes. The black around here is not empty space. Space is in here. What's out here is nothing. But humans you cannot conceive of nothing. Every thought that you have, with no exception, it doesn't matter how hallelujah you are. You may see God in every molecule of the world, which is probably correct. But every thought you have is couched in the box of time, space, and matter. You cannot think out of that box. You can't extract time from your thoughts. Because, for instance, if you extracted time from your thoughts, then you would... Right? The camera didn't break. It's just they didn't have time. Nothing would be happening. There's a great quote from I learned it from John Archibald Wheeler in his book, in the Pecan Street Cafe and the men's room wall, written in Texas, Austin, Texas. Time is God's way of keeping everything from happening all at once. Time is God's way of keeping everything from happening all at once. Because if you're outside of time, everything is both money. Everything is simultaneous. And that's the whole Indian of God knowing the future outside of time, but inside of time, tomorrow has not happened. That's why you do have free will. We talked about that a week ago. Anyway, so we see this measurement going back in time. It takes 14 billion years. But the Torah sees time from the beginning looking forward. We look back in time. And that's the difference. What would it mean to look from here? So just really, really quick. I know we talked about this last time, I don't really remember. But in any event, over here is a galaxy. It's far away, billions of light years away. And over here is our great big telescope. Well, it's a beautiful galaxy. We don't see it lifetime. The light has to travel to us through space. Light travels through space, but space is stretching. So what does that do to the perception of time? On that galaxy, we'll see a star explodes. It's called a supernova. Huge burst of light, and light goes out in all directions. It's the same in all directions. We're just going to talk about from here towards our telescope. Boom. A week later, another supernova. So this burst of light traveled a whole week, and then this one started. Now, if that burst stood still, obviously it doesn't. This would bump into it in a week. But it doesn't. It's moving. So they're going to move through time and space. But for the billions of years that it takes to reach our telescope, space isn't static. Space is expanding. So what about the space between the bursts? They're getting further apart. So let's say it takes so long the universe gets twice as big. So now at the galaxy, when it happened, boom, and then a week later, so it's 1 week of time travel. But now it's twice the distance. The first burst hits the telescope, wow, a supernova. But now it's twice the distance. So instead of the second burst reaching our telescope a week later, it reaches our telescope 2 weeks later. My measurement, my perception of the events on that galaxy is 2 weeks. I want to know what it was like back in time, so I have to go back in time. I can't do it physically, but mathematically, I mean, the galaxy might be gone already after these billions of years. But I can call up an astronomer, how far away is the galaxy, how much time does it take back, and you go back in time, and as you go back in time, the universe gets smaller, and the 2 weeks become 1 week. 2 perceptions of one time, of one event. If we knew the amount of stretching from the Bible's point of view, looking from the forward, going forward, we could say how much compression there would be. A factor of 2 if the universe is a factor of 2 larger. A factor of 100 if it's 100 times larger. A factor of 1 billion if it's 1 billion times larger. The difficulty is no one will ever know this moment of creation. Because first of all, the universe is opaque for the first several 100,000 years as we measure time. But also, we have no idea at that point, even if it weren't opaque, we couldn't see it because the point is so small that it's beyond, only certain things can be measured. And there's a limit to how you can measure anything. And the only way we can understand the creation of the universe, as Ed Trivan pointed out in 1973, is by quantum physics existing before, I'm not going to, it's just, in any event, a quantum fluctuation, and then the laws of relativity. But anyway, this is not relativity we're talking about, it's just pure astronomy. So the Ramban says, Hazman Nivra, time is created. But then he adds a nuance, and he says, however, Mi sheyesh yifos bozman. Mi sheyesh, when you can grab onto something, matter, time grabs a hold, tofes. Hazman Nivra, time from Bria is created, after creation. However, only when you have matter, mi sheyesh, yitfosbo, will time grabs a hold. And that's interesting, that's literally correct. The beginning, the Big Bang produced energy, super powerful light beams, electromagnetic radiation. That energy morphed and became matter. Einstein's famous equation shows how that can happen equals mc squared. And then over time, the matter, we have no idea how these things happen, becomes alive and brain and mind. It's mind-boggling to think about that fact. But what's crucial for the age of the universe is the Ramban differentiates between the creation of the universe, when time is created, at the creation of the universe, Hazman Nivra, and the formation of matter. Now, that we know. Now, the question is what matter? Well, the first stable matter that defines matter as we know it is protons. Because if you say 1 proton, you're saying hydrogen. If you say 6 protons, you're saying carbon. If you say 8 protons, you're saying oxygen. We just, like some people call it Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but we call it the first day of the week, the second day of the third week. They're both saying the same thing. So if I just say number 8, or number 8, for the atomic number, then I'd be saying oxygen. In other words, 92, I'd be saying uranium. Okay, I think at this point, I think it's correct. In any event, so protons form at an energy level that is known, because we know the what's called the rest energy of a proton. We know the energy it takes, because remember E equals mc squared. It takes a certain amount of energy to form a certain amount of mass, to change form, to condense as matter. So we know the mass of a proton, so we know the energy level that is required. Now that's interesting, because we know the energy level out here thanks to Arno Penzias and his assistant, Robert Wilson. Penzias a Jew, Wilson, his assistant, was a Gentile. It's kind of like with it's kind of like what Maimonides says, that the Gentiles spread, we brought the information to the world, but they spread the information around with some nuances that are different from our idea. But we are the trunk of the tree of that knowledge, and it's the same thing with Penzias and Wilson. Okay, but just in unnecessary aside. In any event, we know the energy of space here. We know it because hundreds of measurements now. It's essentially by measuring the temperature of space. Not the temperature of the room and the air here, and not the temperature in the space between the sun and the earth, because you have radiation, heavy radiation from the sun. But the space where it's far from any local, let's say, inputs of energy. And that gives you a temperature, just rounding off numbers, of 3 degrees above absolute zero. So that's about minus 270. It feels like that sometimes, minus 270 centigrade. It's about minus 450 or so Fahrenheit. It's almost absolute zero. At absolute zero, all molecular motion stops. Okay? So the space is pretty cold already. But we know that number. It's called 3 Kelvin, or 3 degrees Celsius above absolute zero. And what's important now, we also know this number. We know the energy level, which essentially can relate that temperature, of protons. And if we take that ratio, and look what it would look like over 6 days, you can calculate what it would be to see time that we take here and extrapolate it back to here. Because every time the universe doubles, the temperature is halved. Every time the universe gets 1,000,000 times bigger, the temperature goes down by 1,000,000. So taking that ratio, we can say how much larger the universe is here than here, and therefore, just like the galaxy experiment, 2 weeks and going back in space would compress back to 1 week, we can go back in time. It's totally a thought experiment. Make it clear, the view from the Bible looking forward is not human time. It's measured in words of humanity, but it's the Bible's perspective looking forward from the beginning. There are no people back here. Okay? It's the Bible's perspective of time, and hence Yom Echad, day one. Okay? All that, essentially, that's all Nachmanides. We just now have the ability to make those numbers, to put those numbers together. And the equation, I know how to, oh, there it is. The equation of that, and I don't like to put equations on the board because it frightens people, but it's an exponential equation, and that I have to tell you is how should I say, not my work, but it's my work, but it's, so you have to try to understand how the relationship would be day by day, because we know it's not linear. We know it's not linear because every time the universe doubles, the perception of time halves. But notice how the rate of doubling, let's say the universe is expanding more or less once you get past this sudden inflation, it's more or less constant. Then you have to make a correction out here, okay, but here. So I'm going to talk about it in this region here. Every time the space between my fingers doubles, I'm going to say double. Usually I ask people to do it, but they always say double, 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 double. Okay, well. I'm going to move these apart, except for the shaking. I'm going to move them apart at a constant rate. Double, 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 double. Notice what's happening? The rate of doubling is changing very rapidly. When is it most rapid? When the universe is small. When is it most slower? When the universe is larger. Which should imply immediately the first day of Genesis would have most of our time in it. And the equation that it matches, I had to think, what would the relationship be? And then I suddenly realized, my background is nuclear physics. It's the equation I've been using for all these years at MIT and in grad school. There is one equation that is the most common relationship in the entire universe. It's an exponential equation, and it measures the rate of radioactive decay. Every atom, ATOM, in this universe that is not stable decays according to this form. It's an exponential equation, and it's half-life, which would make each day a half-life. Half-life means if I had 1,000,000 atoms here, and it has a half-life of 1 day, then 1 day later I wouldn't have a 1,000,000 atoms, I'd have 500,000 atoms. And 1 day after that I wouldn't have the 500,000 atoms, I'd have 250,000. And 1 day an eighth, it's a half, a half, a half. And the equation, I'm not trying to frighten anyone, but if anyone wants to work it out, it is the most fundamental equation available in the universe, and it's A equals A0 e to the minus lambda t. where A0 is this immediate ratio, and I have no control. What's important is I have no control over this. That A0 is this huge number where the very hot divided by the 3 degrees of today. I'm rounding off the numbers, obviously. This is a gigantic number, but it's unitless. It's unitless because it's got temperature divided by temperature. So there's no units. That's a problem, except when you integrate this equation, which you have to do. When you integrate the equation, this drops down, and this t and lambda t brings the units of days back into the equation. You integrate this over the 6 days, and you get a number. So the number, I'm just going to call it the average normalized number. Okay, the number that if you average it out over the whole time. That number is, you do it day by day. But I'm just going to take them all together rather than, sort of trying to end it. Okay. That number, and I have no control over this, make it very clear. It spins from this number. It's much more interesting when you do it all together, day by day, because I'll tell you, when the numbers came out, it was pretty scary. I mean, I'm just showing you one of these. It doesn't smell quite so lethally. Maybe this, of course, these are pretty. I'm trying to hold my breath here. The number that comes out is, that's the normalized number, okay, from this, but it's much more interesting than day by day. 900 billion. It's a unitless number. It's a unitless number, just like this A0 is a unitless number, because it's the ratio of energy from here to here. The way, you know what I mean, by having no unit, because I want to do this so people understand. If you had 10 degrees, you divide it by 5 degrees, what's the answer? 10 degrees divided by 5 degrees equals? 2. 2 what? Why nothing? Why not degrees? Exactly, these degrees cancel. That's exactly what, it's unitless. It's unitless. So now we have 14 billion years divided by 900 billion. What's so great about this is it's all billion. You realize it could be any number under the sun, but it's all billions. So now I have 14 years, because they remain, divided by 900, which equals 15 thousandths of a year. That's the age of the universe from the Bible's point of view. I have no control over this. My only assumption, because I had to find out what the relationship would be, is to take what I would assume the most common relationship in the universe. And we only have 2 things that are common here in this whole statement, namely that it's superlinear, it's not linear. That is to say, it's half. It's linear would be half, but it's not. Okay. And the other thing is the half period would be day, because it's the only unit, the only number for time given. It comes out to be 15 thousandths of a year, which is amazing, because when you change it into days, you do get 5.5 days. So it's not like a trick. The universe is 5.5 days old. The universe is 14 billion years old. There are 2 perspectives of time, and the Bible knew it. That's why it starts the calendar from Chazal knew it, and the author of the Bible knew it. And therefore, we have a unique description of time for the first 6 days, and which is never repeated in the text. At the creation of the soul of Adam, the description of time changes. And with that change in the description of time, the Bible takes on a perspective of earth time. Therefore, we read, Adam and Eve live 130 years, the kid never said, Seth was 105 years on earth. That's earth time. So the 2 perspectives of time, one from the Bible looking forward from the beginning, that's up to Adam, and Adam, it abandons that approach, takes on an earth-based time. Yes?